Okay, so what verses in the Bible back up purity culture?
Okay, so probably the main one that is used is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 3 through 8.
Okay.
All right, let me read it.
All right.
Okay. For this is God's will, your sanctification, that you keep away from sexual immorality, that each one of you knows how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not with lustful passions, like the Gentiles, who don't know God. This means one must not transgress against and take advantage of a brother or sister in this manner, because the Lord is an avenger of all these offenses, as we also previously told and warned you. For God has not called us to impurity, but to live in holiness. Consequently, anyone who rejects this does not reject man, but God, who gives you his Holy Spirit.
So if you have sex outside of marriage, you just rejected God.
Yes, that is the way it's framed.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the crazy thing is, it's not even saying that if you have sex, you've rejected him. What it's actually saying is if you reject the idea of what it's presenting
pure.
Here, yeah, or you reject the idea, and I even have issues with the whole language we're using with pure or not pure. But
okay,
let me get to that in a second too. But what it's actually saying here is, all right, if you reject this idea that you need to keep away from sexual immorality, if you reject the idea that, it's okay to, or if you reject the idea that you need to stay away from lustful passions, that's rejecting God. Okay.
But and you do that by doing it.
But how many individuals growing up in the church, they would agree to these things, but they're in a moment, they end up having sex. And it's not that they wanted to reject God, right?
Right.
They ended up having sex. But now if I'm interpreting this as if I have rejected God.
Right. Which is how purity culture people are interpreting it.
I don't want to label them as saying that's how they're interpreting it. I'm just saying this is how it can be interpreted.
Okay.
And what the problem with that is, if I believe that by an act of sex, I've rejected God, right? An act of premarital sex, that I've rejected God, then the idea is, well, if I've rejected him, he's probably rejected me.
Okay.
Right?
There's a lot of leaps there.
Yeah. Granted. Or if nothing else, if I've rejected God, then I have shame.
Right.
Okay. And I don't think there's as much of a leap there.
Right.
And so, but my problem with that is, but there's still the part of, all right, but what do I do when any of us sin? Right? There's still forgiveness. There's still redemption. There's still mercy, and there's still grace.
But a piece of you isn't gone with all those other sins.
Apparently not.
Unless you cut your own leg off or something.
Right. Then obviously.
Right. Then a piece of you is gone.
But I think that, but you understand how you can take this passage and create a whole understanding of quote unquote purity culture.
This is what we were talking about last week.
What's that?
About taking one verse.
Oh, sure.
And to the extreme.
Right.
And then now you have a cult.
Right. Yeah. And so for example, when I read this, I am not disagreeing with anything that's written here. Right.
That's kind of what that's where my head is at.
Okay.
Like with all of this, like it mostly seems right according to the Bible, but it just got taken too far.
Yeah, I think it was, again, for me, it's the manner in which things were said, the methods which were implemented, and the shame based part of this that's going to be found anywhere where legalism is found.
Okay.
And so this is, I mean, purity culture is like
because having sex before marriage was the ultimate sin when it came to legalism.
Yeah, and how many times in youth group, did you probably hear don't have sex?
I mean, every day.
Yeah, but conversely, how many times did your youth pastor say, let's actually talk about sexuality?
That would be illegal.
Yeah. Let's actually talk about sex and it being a good gift of God in the context of marriage.
That's illegal, right?
It's seemingly, because it wasn't. That's where I'm kind of getting with all this. If all your message is don't have sex, don't date, don't kiss, you're right. If that's your message, and you're just telling all the don'ts, and you're not addressing the fact of, like you mentioned earlier, like the reality is, yeah, I'm 15, 16 years old. I've got sexual urges just flowing through my body.
Yes.
Right? Where's the conversation about that?
I guess you're supposed to have it with your parents because...
But parents were so awkward too. They didn't want to have that conversation either.
Right.
Which is crazy because so many of the parents of that generation were part of the free sex revolution that happened before that.
Mom, weren't you on MTV?
You were at MTV Spring Break. And so, but it just, that's part of but I think that's kind of what happened, right? Again, we talked about this. Mm-hmm. It's like the reaction to all these things, right? Like, okay, well, if there's all this, the kind of free sex revolution, then the response to that is legalism. Well, now the response to that is, all right, just don't have sex. Just, almost like, let's just don't talk about it.
Right.
As if that's going to accomplish anything. But also, I think parents felt like it was a shameful or embarrassing topic.
If you're telling your children not to have sex, then you can't tell them that you did the same thing. Right?
Yeah. Or
like,
I think it's hard when you're talking to your, it's like,
well, but you did, and they don't have an answer for that.
Right.
Parents don't have an answer for that.
Yeah. And even if they didn't, I don't think parents felt embarrassed or shamed or awkward in talking to their kids. And that's not a new thing. I think that's been going on for a while.
Just shove them in the purity culture cult.
Right. Basically, it was, we're going to teach you what not to do.
Right.
Teach you to stay away from these things, but we're not going to have conversations.
Right.
And I think that's what I mean by the methods being off, the manner in which it was presented being off.
Right. Okay.
Like, no, you got to have open conversations. Like, you've got to talk about sexuality, sexual desires and urges, and like all of these things just needed to be discussed instead of just going, don't have sex.
I'm going to have questions about that when we do like an episode on that. Like when, at what point does sex actually occur?
Okay.
During sex?
Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, are we talking about intercourse, not intercourse?
Not like how far in?
Right.
Till it counts?
Okay.
I mean, those are real questions.
They're real questions.
Those are real questions that purity culture children had.
Absolutely.
Because you told us never to do this thing and then didn't define what it was.
Right. And then so the constant question from the purity culture kids was, well, how far is too far?
Right.
That was always the question.
And nobody ever answered it.
And right. And so, I mean, I remember it was so interesting to me because, not growing up in the church and then getting saved and then coming into this culture. Because, I mean, Joshua Harris and I are the same age.
Okay.
So that's kind of weird too, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm 20 years old when this book comes out.
How would you have known not to have sex unless this book was out? That's crazy to me.
Well, yeah. Well, I'll get into my whole thoughts on all of that in a second, but it's unfortunate that whole culture came forward and just, again, the damage that it ended up doing.
It caused more sex than it prevented.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. Stats,
pregnancies?
Stats of sexual activity among young people during this window, if you were, actually went down. And so now, whether those stats are accurate or not, that can be left up for debate, but it actually went down. And so but obviously it wasn't a long lasting effect.
Right. And now it's way up.
And now it's way up again. And so and it's even, I mean, and I say it's way up. I mean,
beyond.
Yeah.
Purity culture was a good way to push everyone all the way the other direction.
Because once you felt like you broke
Yes.
the pledge, the promise.
Right. It was like, oh, let's go try all the things now.
Because if you felt like
everyone.
If you feel like you rejected God, the church has rejected you,
God's rejected you.
God's rejected you, then I mean, what did we think was going to happen?